What's up, everybody? My name is Jacob Hardison, and today we're going to give my final thoughts on the Tekno EB48 2.2. Alrighty, so here we are back in the hot seat with, of course, my lovely Tekno EB48 2.2, and today I wanted to do a follow-up video, effectively, of my initial impressions video. Now that I've gotten the opportunity to spend a little bit more time with the car and driving on a few different surfaces with a few different tire setups, a few different car setups, I think I can give a pretty good idea of just what the car is and what to expect when you potentially go out and buy one of these, or maybe even just, mess with a car you already have. Maybe you already have this car. But nonetheless, this is going to be basically a revisitation of just kind of my thoughts on the vehicle. Now, to jump just straight into the face value end of things and get out of the way the kind of repetitive stuff, of course, I said in the first video that the build, the way the manual follows, the way the kit itself goes together, I feel like it's a very solid car. Now that I've gone through and done plenties of rebuilding stuff and maintenance stuff on it, I can't say that I have any gripes of, oh, I wish this was a little bit easier to get to, or, just I'm having this problem. I haven't had any of that. The maintenance end of things has been super easy on it. It's got quick access diffs, so it definitely makes that end of things very nice and very, very user-friendly. So now we've gotten that very, very quick spiel out of the way, we'll jump into the more nitty-gritty end of things, which is, of course, the driving characteristics of it. And then we'll end off with kind of my thoughts on what style of driver or who may be interested in this type of vehicle. So to jump into our surfaces and driving end of things, even though I've only gotten to do driving with this vehicle here at Adrenaline, we do, of course, have our outdoor track, which I did get to do a little bit of driving before we transitioned to our indoor season, as I went over in that initial impressions video. And then, of course, we have our indoor season here. So I've been able to do lots of testing on the indoor track, and I've had the opportunity, even though it's the same track, to drive on different surfaces. And to kind of give a little more insight onto that, because of the way our building is set up, it's not temperature controlled or humidity controlled. It is very based off of what the weather is outside. And if it is too cold, then I can't put any water or anything down on it. And we did have that happen. And because that happened, I got to drive a couple weeks on a dry, dustier, outside the groove track, maybe not as high grip. And then once it started to warm up like it is now, I was able to put a lot of water on the track. The track was in a very, very prime condition with the temperatures coming up and all the moisture in the track, to the point that we were even able to drive on a full slick. I mean, there was still a little bit of tread on the tires, but the main contact patch of what was on the ground was pretty much a full slick. So with that kind of background information, I feel like that I was able to kind of tell where the car excels, where it doesn't excel, and kind of just what it's happy with. So we'll start out with the lower grip end of things, which I think is where this car is truly at home. It's where it really, really wants to be. And my reasoning for that is just by looking at the style of the vehicle, the geometry of it, you can tell that it is, of course, a very narrow pivot car, long arm, and it's got a fairly tall shock tower. And to add some more information to that, you can kind of look at your pivot points as triangles. So you could take your lower D-block pivots, or just your lower hinge pin pivots, and take those 2 points and then bring them to a point in the center of the shock tower, and that'll tell you kind of just how wide your car is. I don't know what the wording is behind it, but it, in this case scenario, shows a very small, tight triangle that's very tall, which means that the car is going to roll a lot because of just the nature of the geometry. And because the car rolls so much, it's going to want to create grip. And grip, of course, on a lower grip track is exactly what you're looking for. And because of that, because of the way this is set up, it's a very confident car to drive. It's a car that on a lower grip track, you can huck it into a turn if you want. And if you just grab the throttle, it'll straighten itself back out. It'll pull you right out, no problems at all. And that is one thing that I do appreciate about this car, especially from a general consumer standpoint, is that you can pretty much throw anything at it where it's happy, and it's just gonna take it. And a lot of times you just kind of have to follow the car's lead. As long as you let the car flow around the track and do what it wants to do, the driving portion of it becomes fairly easy because you're not having to make a ton of inputs. The car is mostly just doing the work for you. So on those lower grip style tracks, the bumpier style tracks, everything about this car design-wise screams that it's gonna do well, and of course it does do well. It's gonna generate really good grip, and because of that narrow pivot, it's gonna allow the shocks to work a little bit more free, which is why, of course, it is going to soak up the bumpier style tracks a little bit nicer as well. Now, I will say that this isn't gonna be an end-all be-all bumpy track car necessarily. Every car is going to be, it's gonna have its acceleration points and its decel points, but this car does seem to handle the bumps a little bit better, but there is no golden ticket necessarily to a rough track car, but this one does do well in it. Now, to transition over to the higher grip end of things, that's where we get a little bit more finicky. I think that as a base setup car, a car that isn't super duper aggressive, it's very balanced front to back, it's gonna do well on the high grip stuff. Naturally, I think a C-Up car does traditionally get a little bit more twitchy on the higher grip tracks, but because of its excel points on the low grip, bumpy style tracks, that then hurts it a little bit on the higher grip tracks. And for typical A scale, that wouldn't be a huge problem at all, but it does seem like that there are more and more tracks coming around that are smoother, higher bite tracks, which is where this guy isn't going to necessarily be as at home at. So if you're somebody that just wants a base confident car, then this is definitely still a really good option. But if you're looking, if you're in that top 5% of people in the world that is trying to maximize, the extra half a tenth, that's where it starts to get a little bit more finicky. So with the narrow pivots and the tall towers, and it likes to roll a lot, it's good to have a little bit of roll on a high grip track, because of course, if you had no roll at all, then it would just want to tip over. But I think that this kind of over rolls and it generates a little bit too much flex, especially with these open towers, that you get this almost weird swappy point where the rear is very reactive. You're not quite exactly sure what it's going to do at the next turn. And for me personally, trying to keep up with my buddy Mr. Lee Setzer, that is where I experienced the majority of my problems. And I do also want to specify that that was when we were specifically running the effectively full slick tire. On the full slick, on the higher grip surface, it definitely became a bit of a handful to drive. I was still able to get it around the track and run a fairly fast lap, a fairly competitive lap, but I definitely had to work a little bit harder. Now, the reason why I started out with the high grip of if you're doing a base setup, a not super aggressive setup, well, then it's just fine because you're allowing the car to do what it wants to do and not necessarily look for maximizing the lap time on the track. I don't have a great way to kind of describe what that feeling is, but traditionally, if you're trying to go and look for that little bit of extra pace on the track, you're looking for a little bit of extra steering, you're looking for a little bit of extra rear rotation, that is when the car starts to feel finicky. As a base, with the shocks laid down, maybe you're running the full kit amount of toe and you're running just standard kick up in the front, nothing special at all, you're not trying to make the car do something it doesn't necessarily want to do, then it's just fine. It is only if you're trying to get that extra little bit out of it. And that kind of transitions me now into my final closing points of the video, which is going to be just who truly is this car designed for? And the answer to that, from my experience and my extensive testing on the different surfaces and setups and everything, is that it's going to be for the type of driver that's just looking to go to the track, have a durable car, a consistent car, a reliable car, and a car that isn't going to be, super hard on the wallet, which that's definitely a very important point for, a lot of guys. Some of these guys are just doing it as a fun hobby and don't necessarily want to spend ungodly amounts of money to maintain or run their car. They just want something that's going to be easy, straightforward, and is going to be fun to drive. And that's exactly what this is. with the exception of those top percentage of drivers that are trying to push this to the maximum everywhere, it's really hard to speak bad about the buggy. I'm like a broken record, I'll be honest with you, but it's really easy. And that's the biggest thing here. And I think that you can tell kind of by the style of the vehicle that it's not marketed as a vehicle that's gonna be the ultra super duper high performance race car. It's definitely built and marketed, I think, as a vehicle that is suited to the majority of racers, which is just having an easy, fun car to drive. You know, having all of the beefy arms and the beefy links and the beefy towers. You know, even though there's the split in between the towers, there's still pretty thick towers. Everything about this just screams durability. And I think that's awesome. I think that, you know, it hits a part of the market that not a lot of the cars necessarily hit, which is a great thing to do because it allows people to be able to get into the hobby a little bit easier. There's definitely some very intimidating cars that are out there, build-wise or drive-wise or maintenance-wise, and this just is not that. Now, I think that for a driver that is going to always be running on a really high grip surface, that's gonna be on slicks, then, you know, maybe I don't know if I would go with this car necessarily. But if you're pretty much doing all of your driving on even a treaded bar tire or on a pin tire, it's gonna be really hard to go wrong with this. The price point of it, the reliability of it, it's really hard to speak bad about it. So my kind of overview of everything is that for the general driver, I give it a 10 out of 10 for pretty much everything. And for the driver that is maybe looking to drive always on high grip or maximize that extra, you know, teeny percentage that only a few of us are really gonna ever be able to actually do anyway, then, you know, maybe I'd look somewhere else. But as my general whole kind of, I guess you could call this a review to some extent, it's a really great vehicle. I think you're gonna have fun with it. You just need to pick and choose a little bit with just the services that you're running on. So that will round us out, of course, for today's video. I appreciate you guys joining me today and listening to me ramble on about my buggy here in front of me. Definitely, if you have any questions about anything or anything that you maybe want me to target a little bit more on the car, about a specific detail at the front end, the rear end, whatever it may be, definitely leave those down below. Send us a message on Facebook, Instagram, whatever is the easiest way to contact for you personally. But with that being said, we'll see you guys in the next video.